The floating wonder of Venice exists today because this city died. Yet almost no one remembers its name. Just miles from Venice, and centuries before any of its palaces or canals, a floating capital thrived here. A city of 20,000 people. So why doesn't the world know this place? Did the lagoon erase it? Or was it Venice, crafting a myth that crowned itself eternal? This is Torcello, Venice's forgotten twin. Once you know its origins, you'll never look at the floating city the same way again. March 25th, 421. That's the date Venetians like to claim as the birth of their city. The story goes that on this day, the chapel, San Giacomo di Rialto, was dedicated, the first stone of Venice. But this symbolic birthday has no evidence to confirm it, more legend than history. The earliest solid record of Venice doesn't appear until 1152. So if Venice wasn't rising in the 5th century, what was happening in the lagoon? Archaeology tells us the first settlers were called Incolae Lacunae, lagoon dwellers. They lived in fishing huts and ramshackle shacks perched on salty mudflats, moving by boat between islands that could barely hold the weight of a person. To survive here required ingenuity. Timber piles driven deep into the mud compressed it into a solid enough base for walkways, docks, even foundations. This is the very engineering Venice would one day be celebrated for, but it was happening here centuries earlier. Search online and you'll find plenty of videos praising Venetian engineering. But why are there so few that mention these techniques were used before any settlements on Venice? Radiocarbon dating beneath Venetian sites like San Lorenzo puts the first people living in Venice in the late 6th to 7th century. That's hundreds of years after lagoon dwellers had already mastered the practice. So why does Venice get all the credit? The old story says the lagoon was only settled when Roman refugees fled invading barbarians. The truth is more complex. People came because of economics. The lagoon was rich, in salt, in fish, in trade. And at the heart of it all was Torcello, 5 miles north of Venice. The name itself, from Torricellum, meaning little tower, hints that Roman watchposts likely stood here. From those beginnings, a thriving harbour grew, then a town. In 638, the Bishop of Altinum, known today as Altino, moved his congregation here, and Rome recognized the founding of the Basilica of Santa Maria Assunta. This documented account came nearly 4 centuries before Venice's Church of San Giacomo. This was no outpost. It was the first permanent capital of the lagoon. So why is Torcello forgotten? If you look hard enough, you'll find voices that tried to break through the noise. In the 1800s, writers like John Ruskin called Torcello the mother of Venice. And without this mother, the daughter might never have lived. By the 10th century, Torcello ruled the lagoon. Up to 20,000 voices crowded its streets. Salt workers hauling their harvest, merchants haggling over silk, priests chanting beneath mosaics that shimmered in candlelight. Even the Byzantine emperor called Torcello an emporion mega, a great port of the Mediterranean. At its center stood Santa Maria Assunta, the cathedral that still survives today, founded nearly 4 centuries before Venice's St. Mark's. The city's story is written in its mosaics. On one wall, the Virgin and Child, radiant against fields of gold. On the other, the vast Last Judgment, angels lifting the saved, demons tearing apart the damned. At the bottom, severed heads, a grim warning that without a whole body, no soul could enter heaven. These mosaics, so full of terror and wonder, would one day gaze out over empty pews. What they witnessed next would feel like a judgment on the city itself. In the 1300s, a perfect storm was brewing, not just for Torcello, but for all of Europe. Harvests failed. A string of famines starved millions. Then came plague. Rats carried fleas. Fleas carried the Black Death, a pandemic that killed perhaps 50 million people, half of Europe. Torcello, already strained, was devastated, and the lagoon itself turned hostile. Sediment clogged its canals, choking harbors and cutting off ships. Stagnant waters bred swarms of mosquitoes, and with them, malaria. Trade soon shifted south, to a small neighbor with deeper waterways. Venice seized the moment. Its ships joined the Crusades, its markets flourished, and power concentrated at Rialto. Some historians believe this was no accident, that Venice deliberately centralized commerce and left its mother city to drown. Compared to Torcello's centuries of suffering, Venice was spared the worst. Its death toll in the plague years was lower than much of Europe. In an age of despair, Venice looked like a beacon of hope. For Torcello, though, the end was agonizing. Families fled and dismantled their own homes. Bricks, columns, even marble capitals were ferried away and reborn as palaces in Venice. Every arch on the Grand Canal may carry a fragment of Torcello. The daughter's rise was written in the mother's destruction. By the 18th century, Torcello was nearly empty. A metropolis dissolved into silence. And as the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, Venice ascended, dazzling the world with art, finance, and power, even as the city that birthed it sank into the marshes. Today, a 45-minute boat ride from Venice brings you to that silence. In the square stands a great stone seat, called Attila's throne, though it was more likely the chair of Torcello's magistrates. Inside the church, Byzantine saints still gaze from mosaics, their eyes fixed where villagers once crowded to worship. And on the edge of the island arches a bridge with no railings, bare and exposed, like Torcello itself. It is called the Devil's Bridge. Local legend says that each Christmas Eve, the devil returns in the form of a black cat, waiting to collect a debt never paid. A story born after the fall, but one that clings to Torcello's ruins like mist. Even Ernest Hemingway came here in November of 1948, hunting ducks and chasing ghosts. He called Torcello a dream of the past. And he was right. It is a dream that deserves to be remembered. Yet the mother of Venice survives as a whisper. The child became the wonder. So why do some cities thrive, while others vanish? Torcello reminds us, every wonder stands on ruins. And one day, Venice itself may share its twin's fate, claimed by the lagoon that once gave it life. Now you know its origins, and you'll never look at Venice the same way again.